So the M2 MacBook Air has been out for a while now, and I've noticed a lot of you guys are debating whether you should get the MacBook Air or go for an M1 iPad Pro instead. So which one is right for you? Let's ramble.
Hold up, things go wild when I pull up. They all on me like it wants.
Hey, what is up guys? It's great to see you all again, and if you're new here, I'm Patrick and this is where I ramble about tech and other stuff. So guys, like I said in the intro, the M2 MacBook Air has been out for some time now. We've done a couple of reviews on the channel and you guys have been super engaged in the comments, which I absolutely love. I love interacting with you guys and hearing your opinions, so please keep doing that. Anyway, the initial review video has also raised a lot of questions in the comments, and we've been trying to answer the most recurring questions in follow-up videos related to the M2 MacBook Air. We've explored whether it's a good computer for students, whether the base model is good enough. We tried to answer the question of what is better to upgrade first if you have to pick only one, the RAM or the storage, and we've compared it to the M1 MacBook Pro because a lot of you guys were unclear which one to get, especially since upgrading the M2 MacBook Air brings it much closer to that Pro lineup in terms of price. Today we'll be trying to answer another frequently asked question, and that is, should I get the M2 MacBook Air or should I spend my money on the M1 iPad Pro instead? And to me, that question makes a ton of sense because there's a lot of similarities between these two devices, which makes it a difficult choice, at least at first sight. But there are also some clear pros and cons to both of these devices, and we'll go over all of them, so hopefully by the end of this video you'll feel a bit more confident making a purchasing decision. Just for the sake of clarity, I will be comparing it to the 12.9-inch version of the M1 iPad Pro, but a lot of these points will also apply to the smaller 11-inch version. So let's start with the similarities. First of all, both of these devices are ultra portable. They're ideal to take with you to school, to work, to a coffee shop, and they're designed as such. They both have fanless designs, which makes it possible for the chassis to be this thin, and it also means they're basically always on, which is another great advantage for a device that is primarily used on the move. They also have quite similar base configurations. Granted, of course, the MacBook Air has the better chip, but both start at 8GB of RAM, both have 8-core CPUs, 8-core GPUs, as well as a 16-core neural engine. And if you choose the 256GB storage configuration on the iPad Pro, which is the base configuration on the M2 MacBook Air, even the price is exactly the same. Both come in at $1,199. Of course, there are some caveats to that pricing, which I will get back to in a minute, but you can see why some people might be having a difficult time choosing between these two devices. However, most of the similarities end here, and there are a lot of differences between these devices that make them unique, and understanding those differences should really help you make a clear decision. One very important thing to consider, in my opinion, is that the comparison we've made earlier on is based on these pure naked devices, which means we have not factored in the Magic Keyboard. And I do believe the only way this comparison really makes sense is by adding the Magic Keyboard. We are, after all, comparing the iPad Pro to a laptop. And of course, that changes a few things. I mentioned a caveat in the pricing, and this is of course that caveat, because when we add the Magic Keyboard to the mix, the price of the iPad Pro package increases by $349, bringing the total of the M1 iPad Pro to $1,548. And that is definitely something to consider when comparing these two devices. The Magic Keyboard also adds bulk and weight to the iPad Pro. The 12.9-inch iPad Pro weighs 1.5 pounds, but the Magic Keyboard weighs 1.6 pounds, bringing the weight of the total package to 3.1 pounds, which is 0.4 pounds heavier than the 2.7-pound MacBook Air, making the MacBook both lighter and slimmer than the iPad Pro. So in terms of overall portability, the win goes to the MacBook Air. However, that also brings us to the major advantage of the iPad Pro, and that is of course versatility. The MacBook Air is exactly that, a MacBook. It doesn't have a touchscreen, you can't detach the screen from the keyboard, and you can't draw or write directly on the surface. The M1 iPad Pro can of course do all of those things and more. For me personally, being able to take handwritten notes on the iPad Pro is one of its major attractions. In certain situations, I much prefer writing things down over typing. Not only does it help me remember things better, I also much prefer handwriting during meetings because when I'm meeting someone, I feel like a laptop forms a barrier between me and that person. Even though you might be typing up what the person is saying, it always gives the impression like you're doing something else. On the contrary, writing things down by hand makes the person feel like you're really paying attention to what they're saying. it's a psychological thing. The one thing I don't like is using the Apple Pencil directly on the glass surface, and that's where today's sponsor, Paperlike, comes in. Paperlike is a screen protector, but it's much more than that. If you're like me and you like to use your iPad to take handwritten notes, Paperlike is a must-have. It mimics the feeling of writing on actual paper. You get more control of the pencil when writing, sketching, or drawing due to the Paperlike resistance and roughness. It makes your handwriting look much prettier. It also drastically reduces glare and fingerprints. But because of the nano dots technology, it doesn't make your screen look grainy. If you use an Apple Pencil, I can highly recommend getting a Paperlike. Every order includes a set of 2 Paperlike covers and the application accessories. They offer worldwide shipping, so if you want to try one out for yourself, there's a link below the video. By the way, they also released 2 new products not too long ago, a pencil grip and also this all-in-one microfiber spray and cloth, which is definitely no luxury, especially if you decide to get the M2 MacBook Air in the midnight color like I have. Speaking of colors, this is where I have to give the win to the MacBook Air again, because it comes in 4 beautiful colors: space gray, silver, starlight, and midnight, whereas the iPad Pro only comes in the OG space gray and silver. Having said that, there are of course plenty of options to pimp your iPad, like this yellow skin by Dbrand. They're not a sponsor or anything like that, I just like their stuff. Another important difference between these two devices is the display. The M2 MacBook Air has a 13.6-inch display, making it slightly larger than the 12.9-inch display on the M1 iPad Pro, but the iPad's display is better in every single way. The display on the MacBook Air is only an LED IPS panel, or Liquid Retina as Apple calls it, whereas the iPad is rocking a mini LED display, or Liquid Retina XDR. It also has 120Hz ProMotion compared to the regular 60Hz display on the MacBook Air, and that is definitely noticeable in things like video playback, gaming, and overall snappiness of the animations. Last but not least, the MacBook Air caps out at 500 nits, which is not very bright, especially when you're using the device outside in the sunlight. You will not have that problem with the iPad Pro, which has a base brightness of 600 nits in SDR, 1000 nits in XDR, and a whopping maximum of 1600 nits in brightness when displaying true HDR content. It also has much better contrast, which I'm sure artists will appreciate. Speaking of artists, for you guys, the M1 iPad Pro almost seems like a no-brainer, as it gives you the option to use the Apple Pencil. That does of course mean that the price goes up yet again, bringing the total package to $1,677. Now, the better display is of course a big plus in a lot of ways, but it does mean that the M1 iPad Pro will eat through that battery much quicker. I typically get about 6 or 7 hours of use out of the iPad Pro, which is nothing compared to the advertised 18 hours of video playback on the MacBook Air. And even when we take into consideration that these machines never really reach the advertised playback time, it will still be a massive difference. So if you absolutely need a machine that lasts you all day, the MacBook Air is the one for you. If cameras are important to you, again, the M1 iPad Pro is a no-brainer. The MacBook Air only has the front-facing webcam, which, even though Apple has finally decided to join the 1080p party, isn't very good. Not that the iPad's front-facing camera is that much better, but it does come with Face ID rather than Touch ID, and the iPad's real camera magic happens on the back with a 12-megapixel wide camera and a 10-megapixel ultra-wide, as well as that LiDAR sensor, which can be very useful for certain professions. There are some pretty impressive apps out there making use of the LiDAR scanner, for example, to scan an entire room. In terms of speakers, both devices have a quad speaker setup, but I do find that the speakers on the iPad Pro provide a bit of a richer and fuller sound than the MacBook Air. It's not a huge difference, but it's noticeable. One massive advantage the MacBook Air has over the iPad Pro is the number of ports. Not only does it have one extra Thunderbolt port, it also has a MagSafe 3 charging port, meaning those 2 Thunderbolt ports actually remain available. The iPad Pro has one Thunderbolt port, but that is the one and only port. So when you're using that to charge your device, that port is not available to be used for anything else, like a dongle or an SSD drive. Unless, of course, you use the port on the Magic Keyboard to charge the device, in which case you will have that one Thunderbolt port at your disposal for different stuff. If you like using wired headphones, you're also out of luck, as the iPad Pro does not have a 3.5mm jack. You can of course use a USB-C dongle for that, but that's less convenient than the dedicated 3.5mm jack on the side of the MacBook Air. So in terms of I/O, the MacBook Air definitely takes the cake. Now, as you can see, quite a few differences setting these devices apart. each with their own pros and cons. But in my opinion, what it ultimately boils down to, and what should probably be the deciding factor for a lot of people, is which operating system best serves your needs. If you need to be able to work with fully fledged software, whether it's the full Microsoft Office suite, Adobe programs, or maybe you need proper production software like Final Cut Pro or Logic, you're gonna need macOS. iPadOS has come a long way, and some of the new features in iPadOS 16 are real steps in the right direction, like Stage Manager, like true external display support, finally, but it's still far from perfect. And while I really enjoy the touch-based OS for a lot of things, whenever I need to do real work, I find myself reaching for a MacBook. Too many professional applications on the iPad Pro still feel a bit like a workaround, and they consume way too much time, and you're better off doing the same thing on a MacBook Air in a fraction of that time. So guys, is there a clear winner between these two devices? I don't think so. Both of these devices answer very different needs, and I would love to hear from you guys after considering the similarities, the pros and the cons of each of these devices. Which one is the winner for you? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please give one of these. It really does help the channel. Subscribe for more content. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.